You're listening to This Cockeyed War podcast, the story of Lieutenant Albert Edwin Haines, G Company, 2nd Battalion, 47th Infantry Regiment, 9th Infantry Division. Introduction. Let the research tell the story. Welcome to This Cockeyed War podcast. My name is Nathan Haines. I am the grandson of Ed Haines, and I am with my father, Jeffrey Haines, who is the son of Ed Haines. And we're here to talk about the story of Ed Haines and his experience in World War II, from the time that he enters as a recruit to when he finishes and comes back home. Dad, I'd like you to go ahead and give us a background on why you started this project with you and your brothers, and what got you going on this.
I guess it probably started a long time ago, probably when I was your age or even younger. I remember going to the swimming pool or the lake with my dad, and I noticed he had these bluish gray indentations in his thighs when he wore his swimming trunks. And your grandpa never went swimming very often because I don't think he liked to show those, but I learned that when he was in World War II, that's where he was wounded. And that's probably the first recollection or first notice I had that he had been in World War II. And then over the years, as I learned more and studied, I began to understand a little bit more and appreciate, and was able to talk to him a little bit, although he didn't talk about it very much, because I don't think he was very fond about his war experiences and how, I guess, truly ugly war is. Anyway, I guess it was in probably 1988, when I was assigned to Bamberg, Germany. I was with the 1st Armored Division there, and I was there with your older brothers and sisters. In fact, you were born in Bamberg, but I think he came before your birth. And he and my mom decided they wanted to take a trip to Europe and come visit us. And so we were thrilled to have that happen, and we were preparing for it because he gave us several months' notice on that. And in the course of those several months, I ran across an article or something about World War II and the fighting and that kind of stuff. And so I wrote a letter to my dad, and I said, when you come, we need to take a trip to the ground where you were during World War II in combat. And his first, and somewhere I have the letter, I could find it somewhere, I'm sure, but in his response, he said, I don't want to do that. And I basically sent another letter back to him, and I said, in so many words, it really doesn't matter what you want to do. You owe it to me, and especially to your grandsons and your grandchildren, to tell us about your experiences, because you haven't talked about it very much. So when they came to visit, there's a whole story about Mom and cancer treatment and that kind of stuff, but that's a story for another time. We left my mom there with your mom, Diane, and the younger kids, and Grandpa and I and Micah and Asher, your brothers, loaded up in the van, and we drove from Bamberg. We drove west to the area where Grandpa had fought. And the first place we stopped was a camping site near Rhein-Main Air Base near Frankfurt, Germany. And he went off by himself that evening, and he basically had a spiritual experience. And in fact, he records it someplace. I don't know exactly where it is. But he basically says, I got to do this. And so we continued our journey, and we did it. And that's sort of where this whole project began to grow in my mind. Anyway, that's sort of the start. What brought it together, I guess, and some of this can be read in This Cockeyed War and the introductions from my two brothers. My sister Joy had also been involved in gathering things up. She taught U.S. history in high school, and she was gathering up stories and doing things with their high school students. And when they got to World War II, she'd often involve Dad in what they were doing, and he would share stories with them and those kinds of things. And so she had some material from him, and it turns out that she had a for lack of a better term, his wartime journal, where he would make little entries almost on a daily basis of his time during World War II. And what he was doing, in essence, was against regulations. He wasn't supposed to do that, but he did, and he kept it. And anyway, so my sister Joy had that, and when she was getting ready to retire or whatever, I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but she sent me all the stuff that he had. It turned out, too, that after he came and we had that visit and walked the ground where he'd fought, and he had those recollections come back to him, I think he started working on capturing some of what he had experienced and how it fit into the bigger picture. And so basically, your Aunt Joy gave me a notebook full of stuff that Grandpa had, notes and things like that. And so that's sort of where it started. It sort of kicked off into high gear with my brothers, with Frank and Doug, and you can read this in the introduction. Uncle Doug came down to see me, and we spread out the map on the floor that Grandpa had used when we had taken that trip, and we identified all the places that he had been based on what little we knew about where he had been. And suddenly we have this thought that we need to do this. It set for a while. We didn't do much with it because Sherry and I went on a mission to Germany, we went on a mission to Virginia. And so it sort of went along, and I think Uncle Doug reached out to Uncle Frank and got him involved. And when we were coming back from our mission, Uncle Frank, in his research, suggested that we stop by the Eisenhower Library in Abilene, Kansas. In the Eisenhower Library were the records from World War II of all the units that fought in Europe. And so Sherry and I stopped by there, and we took pictures of the logs, of the reports, and that's really when I got real excited about things. And I think Uncle Doug was already excited, and having drugged Frank into it, he got excited too. And so we came up with this cockeyed idea of I would transcribe the logs from the units where Dad had been assigned, and I would also transcribe his journal up to the time when he was wounded. Uncle Doug would go through all the letters that went back and forth between Grandpa and Grandma, at the beginning of their marriage and his going through World War II and those kinds of things. And so he went through those and pulled out information about what was going on in the war. And Frank was priceless in digging into the internet and finding other people and making connections and drawing all that kind of stuff together. That's sort of a long introduction to maybe what you asked for, but that's sort of the way this whole thing started. So when it was all said and done, we decided we'd organize the book sort of by day, and we start with the higher echelon units and then go down to the love letters, if you will, between Mom and Dad, and we'd capture what happened on a daily basis as best we could based on what the record showed us, and that's what's gone into that book.
That's great. If you could you, in your introduction, I'll just read this first sentence that you say, and then we'll go into some details and example. The first thing that you write is, Dad never talked about the war. Having participated with my brothers on researching his war experience, I now understand why. Can you explain a little bit what made you write that in your introduction?
It probably goes back to some study of history. And over the years, as I studied history, and in particular military history and that kind of stuff, you begin to understand that war sounds so glamorous and wonderful when you're not in it, because all you're hearing is about the victories and those kinds of things. But even the victors have really hard times. And I think, too, my experience in the military, 22 years in the Army, and actually teaching operational warfare and studying military history even more deeply from that angle and perspective, I began to get an appreciation for, no matter where you are in war is ugly. And I think seeing my father go through his change, if you will, where before that trip, he never talked about the war. And if the subject ever came up, he would brush it quickly on and move on to something else. And I think he came to the realization, and this is me speculating because I never heard him say this. I think he came to the realization that it was important that he share how awful war is, whether you're the good guy or the bad guy. You don't want to do it. When you're the good guy, sometimes you have to do it. And it's still going to be ugly. People are still going to get hurt. People are still going to get killed. People are still going to have a hard time. And it scars you for life to a certain degree. I've often said, as a family and as individuals, we never went camping when I was a kid. And I remember one time we were stationed in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we would talk about going camping, and maybe us boys would come home from church youth activities or scouts or something like that and say we should go camping. And finally, I remember Mom said, "Okay, we'll go camping." And so we loaded up the big Dodge station wagon with, 6 or 7 or 8 kids, how many there were, and off we went to some lake somewhere in Indiana, I think. And we got there, and it was hot and humid and sticky and mosquitoes and miserable. And there was a lake, and it may have been fun some moments, but it was awful. And we were sunburned and mad and squawking at each other. And we should go home. And Mom said, "Nope, we're not going home. We're going to get this camping bug out of our system." And so Grandpa never was a camper. He didn't necessarily like doing that kind of stuff because I think he had enough of it during World War II. And having gone through this experience and researching where he'd been and what he had done and what his journal said, I totally understand why he didn't like to go camping. I think it brought back bad memories that he didn't want to have. But I also think that based on that experience, when he came to visit us and he had that epiphany, so to speak, he needed to share it so that we could learn as much as we possibly could and accept from the experiences that he had.
I'm glad you still took us camping.
Yeah.
Despite that.
I'm not sure how well I did, but anyway.
Could we dig into kind of an example of how this book is structured? Because this is how we're going to structure the rest of this podcast as we go throughout the different experiences of Grandpa's life. And in your introduction, you break down the operation report and explain what each of these unit and staff designations are and mean. So if you could kind of give us the top level report that you're putting in this, that you and your brothers put in this Cockeyed War book. And for those of you listening and following along, this is on page 3 of the book. If you could kind of take us from that high level entry down to Grandpa's experience, that'll kind of give us a preview of what's to come.
Okay, then rather than start on page 3, I think we probably ought to go over to page, how about page 13? Well, let's go to page 11, just to this is sort of a shorter version of what's further into the book. So starting with page 11, basically at the top of the page, you have the date. And this particular page says the date is 3 October 1944. And Grandpa is located in the Aachen or the Röttgen area in Germany. And it's got a little weather statement there because we happen to know what that was based on information. And I guess on October 3rd, rain, mud, and cold. The next entry there would be the next higher unit that we have information about. In this particular case, what we have is the 47th Infantry Regiment, which is the regiment that Grandpa was assigned to. 2nd Battalion, which was the battalion in that regiment that he was assigned to. And basically, this is their after-action report of the period of 1 to 9 October. And it says during the period of 1 to 9 October, it talks about what they were doing, where they were, what they did, just a very brief synopsis. We then go down to the next line, the 47th Op Rep on 3 October, the journal recorded in the OPREP, the operations report, that they had artillery fire and those kinds of things. We then have letters on the 3rd of October written by Grandpa to Grandma. And basically here you're getting a synopsis of, first of all, you have to understand that the mail would be mailed, and it would be late or early, or usually late. They get bundled that may not be picked up. He may not get a letter until they got a whole bunch of them, and there's gaps in the time. So Uncle Doug did the best he could in trying to put these together so they correlated with the dates of what was going on in the unit. And so here you see his letter back. Okay. And a couple other pages, it even goes a little higher. It talks about other things that may have been going on in the theater of operations. But usually our desire was we would start with the highest echelon that we had information about and go down from there. So the best way to explain that is to start at the bottom and work our way up, because usually we had letters from Grandpa. The next thing that would be there would be his journal where he wrote things. It's the individual and then the next line up would be the battalion information. And then the next line up would be the regiment information, the 47th Infantry Regiment. And then sometimes in there we're going to have the division information, what they were doing, and that was the 9th Infantry Division. And then we go up from there, what unit they may have been attached to, or what corps the division was in, and those kinds of things, all the way up to what may be going on in the theater, depending on what we could find in the literature and in the document. So sometimes there's information of higher echelon units doing things, and sometimes there isn't because we didn't know what was going on. So does that help sort of give you the structure?
Yeah, that's great.
So going back to page, where it was page 3, is that where it was?
That's right, yeah.
So I'll just really quickly, because this is the part that I was focused on mostly. It talks about entries in the logs. And what was amazing to me is Sherry and I were capturing images of these logs. Imagine, if you will, 18, 19, 20-year-old soldier, fresh, maybe out of high school, but probably not. Green as green it can be. He's been to basic. He knows how to fire his rifle. He's an infantryman. He may have volunteered that he knew how to type. He may not have volunteered, but if he volunteered that he knew how to type, he was probably immediately put into a clerk position. And so imagine, if you will, a tent in the woods, in the cold and the rain. And we'll call it a GP small, which means you can put maybe 4 or 5 people in it if you crowded them in. And you've got some radio in there, and you've got some telephones in there coming from different places, higher headquarters, coming from adjacent units, coming from subordinate units. And you're sitting in there, and you've got an officer running around, and he's trying to make decisions. And you're this young PFC, tech sergeant, tech specialist, whatever, and you're sitting at this typewriter, and you have to record what's going on. And so you have this log. And what's amazing to me is I think about these kids, and they would have manifold paper, which is basically carbon paper that you'd put on the front. You'd put a regular sheet of paper on the front of 3 or 4 pieces of carbon paper, and you'd stick it in the manual typewriter, roll it in, get it centered, get it tabbed, and then you'd start typing this log. And so, for example, here on page 3, this talks about what happened on the 30th of January, 1945. And basically, you'd have the time. In this particular case, 0443 is 4:43 in the morning. In other words, in the middle of the night. And then these are from and to. These are abbreviations that have not changed that much, even when I was in the Army. But for the sake of those that don't know what they mean, it's good to know who the log and who the messages were sent to and what was communicated to them and those kinds of things. So in this particular case, at 4:43 in the morning, it was from the battalion S2, from the regimental S2, which means they're the military intelligence people. They're the ones that are supposed to know what the enemy is doing or not doing. they're supposed to be able to report the conditions of what's going on out there as far as the enemy goes, not what the friendly forces are doing, but what the enemy may be doing. And it says here that they were sending it to the G2. Well, the G2 is the division headquarters. So from the regimental S2 to the division G2, they're sending up their subordinate report to the higher headquarters. And basically what they're saying is white in vicinity of, and then it's got some numbers, no contact. And what they're saying there is white is the shorthand for 2nd Battalion. Because back in World War II, the regiments usually had 3 battalions. And the way they designated them was red was 1st Battalion, white was 2nd Battalion, blue was 3rd Battalion. So that's what that is. So white in vicinity of, white meaning 2nd Battalion of their regiment. So the 47th Infantry Regiment 2nd Battalion in the vicinity of a bunch of numbers. And those numbers are grid coordinates. What's really fun about those grid coordinates is there's programs on the internet that allow you to convert those grid coordinates to longitude and latitude, which then means you can put them into Google Maps, which then means they then become places that you can go and see. And it's really sort of fun I've got a whole discussion about that later on. I've shared that with your brother. And basically what the S2 is telling the G2, what the the intelligence officer is telling the division intelligence officer is there's no contact with the enemy. 2nd Battalion, white, is in the lead in the advance, and they've had no contact. So that's at 4:43 in the morning. At 4:45, 2 minutes later, they get the regiment gets a message from white, and who's white?
It's Grandpa.
2nd Battalion. They get a message from white to the S3, and S3 is the operations people. They're looking after what are we doing here? What's our execution plan going to be? So the S3 are sort of the operations directors. So white is telling S3 that white drew SA stands for small arms, between CPs 43 and 17, and CPs are checkpoints identified on the battle plan, if you will.
Yeah, to clarify, small arms means small arms gunfire.
Yeah,
right?
Small arms gunfire, basically from pistol up to machine gun. If you've got indirect fire from artillery or mortars, that's the next step up. Okay, so they're getting direct fire. One officer hit. It is probably an outpost. That's what they're guessing where the fire came from. And so that's sort of what that is. The next things I write there in the introduction is just my interpretation of what that means. And that probably was the report that was Dad getting hit by a German machine gun.
Yeah. So that one line, white drew, small arms fire between CPs 43 and 17. One officer hit, meaning Grandpa.
Probably Dad. Grandpa. Yeah. Because
it's probably an outpost. Yeah. It's a very simple entry.
Very simple. But there's a big story behind all that. I mean, and that's a lot of what this is all about. And this whole book here is about and Uncle Doug captured it well in his introduction. He said, basically, in fact, he's told me this before. We've had our excitement. We've had our discovery by doing this. We encourage others to do the same thing. And writing the story may be for somebody else to do. And that's one of those things I've often thought that I need to be that somebody else to write the story. And I haven't done it yet. So it's good we're doing this podcast.
That's right. Yep. This is our attempt at writing the story, or in this case, telling the story through the podcast format or through the oral history format. And yeah, I'll just read that line from Uncle Doug because I think it's great. In Uncle Doug's introduction near the end, he says, "This book is a compilation of research that tells the story of L.T. Haines. We have not told the story based on this research, just let the research tell the story." Meaning, as you read the book, they're giving us the facts. They're giving us those reports. They're giving us the letters between Grandpa and Grandma, and also, of course, Grandpa's journal entries. And then he says, writing the story from here might be left to another, more confident in their own writing. In this case, I'm excited to interview you, Dad, because I feel like you are a confident storyteller. And I look forward to more episodes to come. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes from this Cockeyed Ward podcast. We're going to start next time with Grandpa Ed Haines leaving New York City on the 11th of September, 1944. This Cockeyed War is an SMC production. It is hosted and edited by me, Nathan Haines. My dad, retired Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Allen Haines, was the featured guest in this episode. The opening bugle call was Adjutant's Call. Closing music is Talmadge Haines performing Stardust, one of Ed and Thelda's favorites.